that will be full of a lot of vigor. We cannot be youths again. We leave the youth to the youths, because the challenges are many, as has been highlighted by the consultants. But we want to look at the framework, what we need to put in place in order to harness that all-important resource for the development of our economy. As we did say inter alia, we have abundant, resources in our country. But how do we manage these resources? Resources like the youths, which we need to put in perspective so that once we have them in focus, they have a lot of energy that could be utilized to produce what we need for our economy. We have listened to the presentations. We have listened to the issues that have to do with our parliaments. What strategies can our parliaments put in place in order to address these issues about the youths? For the executive, they have a lot of areas. They can appoint them as youth leaders. They can appoint them as ambassadors for goodwill. They can appoint them as even ministers of youth affairs. All of these opportunities are made available to harness this all-important resource. We have also listened to the conceptual framework by the consultants and how we can utilize this various framework in order that we can achieve maximum benefit from our natural resource. So this afternoon, we are going to share the experiences that we have from our various countries to see how we can put this framework together in order that we assist in formulating policies for our various governments. As I did say inter alia, we in Sierra Leone, the experience that we had during the war, that's why for now, we find it very difficult to adapt to the concept of youth. There is a Ministry for Youth Affairs they established to address the issue of youth, a Ministry for Women Affairs to address the issue about women. But when it comes to preparing a framework for the responsibilities, we find it very difficult. We have in our Constitution freedom of speech. But there are also responsibilities that go with the freedom. So you cannot say you want total freedom and neglect the responsibilities that go with this. This is where we find the conflict between the programs that they normally put for the benefit of the youths. Without much ado, I would like to invite all of us to look into the discussions that we have just had this afternoon or this morning, and to see how we can fill in the gaps so that we'll map out a strategy for the way forward in addressing the issue about youth and assisting the Pan-African Parliament and our national parliaments to come up with a framework, the role of the NGOs, civil society organizations. All of these are centerpiece in the development of our country. You have most of these youths engaged in NGOs, in INGOs, in all forms of civil society organizations. But yet still, we still find it difficult to address their issues. But maybe with the presence of our colleagues from various countries, maybe let us see how various countries address these issues of the youth. So once again, I want to thank the presenters and to invite all of us to share our experience. Thank you. Yes. Yes, yes. Go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to be focused in my comment. I don't want to speak on behalf of the state of Côte d'Ivoire. I'll just speak as a parliamentarian because I don't have that authority. Before anything else, I would like to thank and commend the speakers of this morning for the clarity and the detail of their presentations. And I'm very happy with the energy shown by the representative of the youth and the brilliant way in which she switched from French to English. So I'd like to commend her and also express my satisfaction at the fact that she's shown how we can have capable young women in this world before this group of clerks. En fait, we have an example. In reality, we have the example of youth who are looking for African recognition, African acknowledgement. All this to say that when you're a young person, it doesn't mean that you are condemned. Actually, you can succeed and also give an opportunity to the public authorities to put in place this momentum. So I have noted that all the speakers have clearly underscored the importance of the youth in the development of a state. And for this youth to show its full capacity, the state should also show interest in the issues. And the youth, being a young person, is not a status. It is just a transition. All of us were young at some time, because we know that as time passes, we grow older. And the representative of the youth is young, but she will get older as time goes by. So it's just a phase. It's a transitional phase, and it's not the final status. Now, so given all this, can we consider or address youth problems separately? No. We have to integrate youth's issues into a global program which takes on board the newborn, people with disabilities, young people, men and women, adults, the needs of the elderly. So we have to take on board the interests of all population groups of all ages. So this being the case, what can a parliament do? As the first speaker mentioned this morning, the parliament has three important roles to play. The first role is the representative role, which is a cross-cutting role. By virtue of the very system of designation of MPs, their role is representation. They have a representative role to play. Now, the second role is oversight of governmental action, and this oversight function differs from one country to the other. The third role, which is the most known role, is to legislate. and make laws. So when we look at these roles one by one, the clerk of a parliament, while he sets in motion the activities of the parliament, he should do his best to take on board youth affairs. Now, lawmaking. And I will just concentrate on one aspect, which is the budget.
I think it is the parliament that is empowered to vote a budget. Today, in our area, which is UMOA, there are budgetary rules, and these rules need to be actually integrated by the parliament's management, because I think parliamentarian terms of office are renewed every 4 or 5 years, and usually we have at least 40 people among the MPs who either leave or come in. So this allows us then to analyze with ease the budget and also see how we can then integrate issues relating to the youth. So that will be a budget preparation that will be sensitive to gender issues. Therefore, the clerk of parliament needs to take all those into account, so that those who are tasked with the duty of analyzing the budget are in a position to better master the ins and outs of the budget, so that we take into account the wishes of the young. And it will be also proper that we have an analysis that is based on both gender and youth. Thirdly, in a representation system, I think it will be important that we make sure that the people at large are able to benefit from the system that we have put into place, to make sure that it takes into account the interests of the youth. So you can see how we need to legislate and the techniques that we need to employ to make sure that we are able to propose laws that are appropriate, not scientifically speaking. So we legislate, and then we balance all that with science. That is legalistic science. And we be in a position to master techniques that help us to integrate the notion of acceding to social reality, which takes into account the wishes of the youth, but also the wishes of civil society on issues pertaining to the youth. So taken from this perspective, is a young person to be considered as someone who is different, who needs to be treated differently from the rest of society, or are we to include matters relating to the youth as something that we ought to integrate in a general picture? That is my first concern. The second item that we noticed after the study carried out on the youth in Côte d'Ivoire and in the UMOA area, we came to the conclusion that the fact that there are people who are involved in cyber criminality, because young people are acquiring knowledge quite quickly. They are no longer actually interested in programs that are being proposed by a government. They don't care. So then how do we then come up with a program that is designed by those who work in government, and we say that it is directed at the youth? And sometimes you see some of the people get rich or some get poor, and poverty is so widespread in our countries that some parents let their children do whatever to bring food and put it on the table. Because I know there was a person who had a number of wives, and he was always in communication with people in Europe. I say, no, don't you see other people coming with cars and bringing them to their parents? So parents have really given up. So they've given up about the education of their own children. So what can the state do under such circumstances? Therefore, today, a young person as a manipulator or a principal actor in cybercrime criminality, how can we then integrate such a person in programs that are designed by government? Then we hear that what is it that we believe constitutes the youth? So it's people who are in the bracket of 15 to 35 years old. So even in Cote d'Ivoire, when we talk about compulsory education, kids who are not in the traditional school curriculum are between 13 and 17, even though education is deemed to be compulsory. So what are we to do, according to you who are experts, to make sure that these kids who are part of that segment, who are supposed to be kids that are supposed to benefit from education provided by the state? Then I know that everybody cannot be employed in the civil service or in private companies. In countries where agriculture is the main economic activity, which is the case for Cote d'Ivoire and other West African countries, we notice that now that agriculture is so-called being mechanized, that is just wishful thinking. And yet we know that agriculture is actually the engine of our economies. But today, kids are not interested in working in tilling the field. So what is the future? What is the future for kids who actually are in rural areas and who refuse to till the land so that they can have an income? So here are some of the thoughts that I wanted to share with you. And by the same token, saying that a clerk can only be there to try and help redynamize work among the youth, but that is not really his real mission. Thank you.
For that brief intervention. Yes.
Muito obrigado, Sr. Presidente, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm Armando Mário Correia. I'm from the National Assembly of Mozambique. I would like to say just a few words about our experience in Mozambique, to share with you concerning this theme. We know that we have all these different tools, such as Agenda 2063 and Addis Ababa Declaration. But in our experience, the questions concerning demographics, health, and other aspects, education, etc., are constitutional aspects. These aspects are covered in our constitutions. They are also part of our strategic plans for education, as well as the national policy for youth that have been approved in the Republic of Mozambique. In Mozambique, we have been creating programs in terms of counseling youth. I'm not going to speak in a systematized way as the other people did. I should have actually started by having thanked all the speakers, the people that spoke before me. But in any case, I will speak as the ideas come to my mind. Our experience has to do with various programs that we have implemented in terms of education and youth concerning HIV/AIDS, TB, malaria, which are great problems for us. The Ministry for Youth and Sports in our country, we have the National Institute for Youth, and we have been implementing a number of programs concerning education of young people in various areas. And we also try to motivate them to study. the education institutes are also encouraged to create space for technical education and professional education. We talk about the biz youth and the biz woman. This is not only to do with academic training, and the way that we try to target the female child is to promote her education in terms of the family, marriage, the choices that she has, and the choices that she has to make once she is married. We have another. I'm sorry, I have to remove my earphones. We have another fund to support the youth in terms of basic investment for activities, business activities. These youth have the assistance of specialists to help them to start up a business, and in a way, this type of activity helps the youth in the areas that we don't have enough education for. But I just wanted to bring to you some of the efforts that we have made in our country regarding the youth. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that short intervention. We have had the experience from Mozambique. We want to have more and more experience. In Sierra Leone, we have just about to complete constructing a youth village, you know, for the training of youth, you know. And the problem we had with that project, somebody went somewhere and made a statement that that youth village is going to be removed from that township to another township. And what happened? The youths went into the rampage and started destroying, you know, the village that had already started being created, without even understanding the kind of statement which somebody made. You see, so this all just goes to underscore the vulnerability of the youths, the sensitivity of the youths. In some other places, you create a Ministry for Youth Affairs to address the question about youths. Is that an incentive enough? In Guinea, for example, before now, I don't know what happens there now. They have these technical institutes where they train young entrepreneurs to become entrepreneurs, so that you become self-sufficient. You employ your self-employed, you know, technical issues, you know, instead of the academic type of education. I think in Nigeria, they have the National Youth Service, you know. All of these are frameworks which they put in place to address the issues of the youths. Maybe these are all avenues that we can share with. What are the challenges of the NIC, the Youth Village, all of these programs, so that putting together this, we can be able to prepare a framework, you know, globally to address the issues. These are the kind of example that we would like to have. Yes. Uganda.
Thank you, Chairperson. In Uganda Parliament, we have 5 youth members of Parliament representing the 5 regions of the country. And these youth members of Parliament are at the forefront to advocate for the youth in Parliament. We also have a committee, a parliamentary committee on gender, labor, and youth affairs. And the Department of Communications and Public Relations also carries out parliamentary outreaches, mainly meant to groom the youth to become leaders. And we also hold youth and high school debates within Parliament. And on the side of the executive, we have youth livelihood programs to economically empower the youth through funding their groups. Youth form groups and register business. Then they are funded through the Ministry of Gender. The President also facilitates youth entrepreneurs, especially those who do carpentry and welding, and also horticulture. We also have Skilling Uganda, which targets the youth, where they are given short vocational programs so that they are able to create jobs for themselves and also employ others. Thank you, Chair.
See, that sounds very interesting to share those. We do not have that kind of framework yet in Sierra Leone, where you have youths also being represented in Parliament. What we are trying to do now in Sierra Leone is we're now organizing outreach parliamentary programs to the schools so that we capture the youths from the schools to demystify Parliament, to tell them what Parliament is all about. We have done so in 5 schools since we started. We explain what is the role of Parliament, what is the role of a member of Parliament, what questions can you ask your members of Parliament. These are the kind of things which we have started doing so that we can capture, the youths from secondary schools, and we invite them to Parliament to come and listen to the debate. Because whenever they say an election, the youths go about the streets, joining the others, the illiterate youths and the literate youths to fight, whenever there is an election. So we start to attract them to this kind of programs so that at the end of the day, they'll be able to understand what Parliament is all about. It is not a monster. You don't fight to go to Parliament. You don't do any of these things. Now they are beginning to understand. So these programs continue, in Sierra Leone. So these are the kind of things which we believe we can share. Okay. Are there more interventions? Yes. Nigeria.
Thank you, Chairperson. I want to share a Zambian experience relating to the issues affecting the youth. In Zambia, matters relating to youth are being handled at various levels. Firstly, we do have some youths whom are idle on the streets, and to address this issue, the government came up with a program where they have set up camps on the outskirts of the city. And in these camps, some of the youths are being rehabilitated, and then they are being equipped with various skills, such as skills in agriculture, in crafts, in tailoring, and so on. And we also have 2 ministries, government ministries, which are dealing with Youth Matters, that is the Ministry of Community Development and Social Welfare, working in conjunction with the Ministry of Youth and Sport. They do encourage youths to form cooperatives. And then when they form cooperatives, they are assisted to come up with business concepts, and then they are given the capital to start something that is in various communities. We also have the First Lady. She too has been championing the cause of the youth, but of course with a bias towards the girl child. That is equipping them and also campaigning against early child marriages. But above all, and bringing in the Parliament, in the 7th Development Plan, there is a good portion to do with the youth. And even before I came here, I had a meeting with the Secretary to the Cabinet to see how they can train our members of Parliament in the issues that are being raised in the National Development Plan. And what that means is that the parliamentary committee, which is dealing with issues of the youth, will have to be drawn to the area in the National Development Plan, so that when the budget comes to Parliament, parliamentarians can ensure that adequate resources are allocated to issues dealing with the youth. Thank you, Chairperson. I submit.
Thank you very much with that experience. Kungo? Yes.
Chairman, you have to look on the other side.
I'm sorry.
Comme c'est une dame.
Since it's a lady, with the chair's permission, I think I will defer to her. It's Women's Day, so please, madam, go ahead.
Thank you very much for yielding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Mildred Seyon, Clerk of the Liberian Parliament. My country, Liberian's experience is that our constitution provides for the youth. For you to become a member of the House of Representatives, it requires that you be at least the age of 23. For the House of Senate, at the age of 25, at the age of 30, and to become a president, you must be not less than 35. And so our country has always incorporated youth in the governance process of our country. Our history also shows that many of our presidents were all youthful presidents. Our Vice President, Joseph Jenkins Ramos, was in his early 30s. In the Second Republic, President Doe was 29 when he became president. We've had ministers. The first minister in our Second Republic for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, G. Barker Matthews, was in his late 20s when he became the foreign minister. We had Minister Edward Komosaiko, the first Minister of Internal Affairs, at age 30. In recent years, we've had Augustin Gaffouin, who became the Minister of Budget at the age of 30. At 36, he became the Minister of Finance. And at 38, he became the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And so we have always had a history of incorporating our youth. Our parliament now is, for the House of Representatives, is dominated by youth. In buttressing that, our government has a Ministry of Gender, Children Protection, and Social Protection. We have a Ministry of Youth and Sports. We also have a Commission on Veteran Affairs that deals with the youth who were used in our civil crisis for all those years. We also have a Mano River Union Youth Parliament. We have a policy on a free and compulsory primary education in our country. We have other youth centers like the Catholic Youth Center that helps with our youth. And so we have always wanted to see our youth in the governance process, entire governance process of our country. And by that, even before the African Youth Charter was presented to us by our foreign ministry, the House of Representatives had already enacted a National Youth Act, which is now before the Liberian Senate for concurrence. And the African Youth Charter is now before our committees for the domestication. That is my presentation on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're very happy, and since we are neighbors, we would visit Liberia to try and see how we can copy the examples that you have just highlighted. The only problem, perhaps, is the implementation. But with you as consultants, I'm sure that we would be able to map our strategies to address our own youth, because we really have a very big problem in addressing our youth. Even in our house, the House of Parliament, the 2-3 youth members of Parliament that we have, you know, there's always very militant in their contribution. There was one that represented the youths, and later on he was so militant that he was made Minister for Youth Affairs. He did not stop his militancy when he was made minister. So what happened? The president removed him from Parliament and made him ambassador to Iran. So you see, now he came back very calm, you know, changing his dresses, wearing the long robe. He said, Mr. Clark, how do I look in this? I say, you look okay, you know. So he's now beginning to acclimatize himself, you see. So these are the kinds of experiences that we would like to share with our colleagues, so that we too can emulate these examples to address the issue about youths. As I did say inter earlier, the big, the opposition party, they do not have youths. They've changed it since after the war. They call their own youth leader Young Pioneer. And the other political party, they call them the Young Generation. Yes, because they fear to call them youths. You call somebody a youth, I mean, what comes to mind is the militancy part of the youth. So that's why we're trying all out to design ways in which to address the issues about youths. Yes, but let's have the experience from the Congo.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chairperson, and dear colleagues. I would like, above all else, to underline the importance of the different presentations that were made this morning. And after having done that, I would like to point out that the issue of the youth, as it was dealt with, and as we are dealing it, and as it is being dealt with at the level of the Pan-African Parliament, is because of the political will from states, from governments. And therefore, we can say that this issue is being dealt with because it corresponds to the public policy at the level of each state. Now, that being the case, let me not come back to the analysis that was made by our colleague from Côte d'Ivoire about what we, as Secretary Generals and clerks of African parliaments, what we can do, but we cannot take the place of the executive, but at the level of parliament, as perhaps one of the administrative arms of a country, we must ensure that the environment is such that parliamentarians can take ownership of all issues that have to do with the youth. But with the youth, being taken in the context of a general economic and political context, we must not limit ourselves only to the aspect of youth as defined in the Charter. A young person is defined not only because of their age, their physical age, between 15 and 35 years, and that can be seen in a lot of the constitutions of states. In the case of Congo-Brazzaville, the constitution which was adopted in 2015 took into account a number of provisions, not only to do with women and issues of parity, but also on issues of youth, in order to lower the age of participation in electoral positions, which at that time was at 25 years. It was lowered to 18 years. And therefore, a member of parliament who is 18, a person can be elected if they present themselves and they're 18 years. Let me just give you a small example just to share experiences. During the last legislative and local elections, which have just taken place in Congo-Brazzaville, there were between 7 and 9% of MPs out of the 151 MPs who are younger than 35 years. Which was not the case in earlier elections. At the level of local elections, out of on all of the territory of the country, and out of 1,141 councillors at the municipal and departmental level, there were about 200 to 280 councillors who are younger than 35 years. I don't have the latest statistics, but just a quick glance at the results was indicating that there were a number of issues. There were a number of issues that one had reason to conclude that out of the 1,141, there were, as I said, between 200 and 250 young members. However, I do think that we should not talk about the youth only in terms of physical age. The youth, and maybe I'm talking as a sociologist, youthfulness is a state of mind. The experience has also demonstrated that some people who are 35 years old or younger and who have occupied high-level positions when they were entrusted with the responsibility were not able to perform to the expected standards. And it is for that reason that today in Congo, little by little, and I'm just saying this in way of example, it is much more an issue of to talk less and less instead of the young people, but rather to give the youth themselves the possibility of talking about their situation and their circumstances, because they are the ones who live in that situation, and that the life they live has to do with the age at which they find themselves. And also there have been a number of courses that have been prepared in collaboration with the United Nations and some civil society organizations to train leaders who are 30 years at the very oldest, train them in terms of business, so that they can be self-employed. And I'm not saying this because it is fashionable. They can also work in different startups. And those training courses have been put in place. And as concerns the different aspects of socialization, because when one is born, one finds oneself in a given environment at the level of one's biological family. One is educated, one is brought up at a certain age. One then goes to school, goes to the educational system, and one has a faith. One enjoys all kind of fun activities, and all of these different environments that are really supposed to determine the basic personality of a person, and especially so a young person taken. If you look at them by their age, a lot of these environments are not very particularly well structured. A short while ago, my friend Marius was saying that some parents really are not doing their jobs properly. And there is also the fact that a certain number of new challenges have emerged. Challenges that are going to radicalize the youth, radicalize them towards activities that are going to get in the way of living in society. Somebody talked about the 4 pillars today, this morning, but another person talked a 5th pillar that was not mentioned among the 4, and that 5th pillar is the pillar of peace and security. This group of people can be easily radicalized as regards some extremist activities that are linked to all kinds of beliefs, or even they can be attracted to cybercrime and many other things. And so, at the level of Parliament, we as Secretary Generals and clerks, at some point, I think we're not particularly well positioned. Our role is to ensure that we create the environment which can allow parliamentarians to take ownership of this issue, so that this can then make it possible for the youth to occupy roles that they are qualified to occupy, because diploma-based qualification has nothing to do with one's capacity to perform a job. So what is it that I must do to ensure that this group of people can then can know who they are, and that they can be properly integrated into society, and that they can contribute to community living. So very modestly, these are some of the thoughts that I wanted to share with all of my colleagues here. And in conclusion, it would be a good thing if this were to be one of the recommendations. In other words, we could say that in order for the youth to be empowered, they need to be there where decisions are being made, so that they can take decisions for themselves. So maybe they could be one can perhaps nominate some of these people who are qualified to positions of responsibility. And if there are some, as my colleague from Liberia said, perhaps they could be nominated to Parliament, perhaps to the Clerks office, because in the Clerks office, that is where the memory of Parliament is, and maybe some young people could be co-opted to work in these places. Thank you.
Intervention. Yes, let's hear from.
Thank you, Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I have listened very closely to the interventions made, and I would like to congratulate them. But I heard, I heard the issue of the role of Parliament as concerns the youth, and the impression that one gets is that it's the members of government who were presenting the different ways in which the youth are empowered in their respective countries. In Nigeria, there are about 10 ministries that deal with the youth, because this is a cross-cutting and multidimensional issue, as was pointed out by one of the speakers in their presentation. And there is a special ministry. There is another one, a ministry called Ministry of Solidarity, which deals with the issues of gender as well as issues of the youth. And also, and the youth who are unemployed, but also young people at risk because of some social challenges. We have training centers for youth business. All of these things exist, but I have to admit that there is not enough for a group that constitutes in virtually all of our countries about 2/3 of the population. So the issue that has arisen, as I understand it, is to say how and what are the ways and means which are at the disposal of Parliament. How can Parliament re-energize this group by giving them responsibilities, by giving them using also the prerogatives that we have in each country? There is a constitution that defines the role of Parliament. For example, there is a separation of power. So could not one say to Parliament that perhaps they're interfering with the work of the executive? There are mechanisms which are at the disposal of Parliament, and all of this, and the role of Parliament is to legislate and also oversight, an oversight role. And during this, and while fulfilling these two roles, the Parliament can play a very major role to defend this group of the population. And it seems to me that if in Parliament there could be a standing committee that deals with sport and youth and so on and so forth. I think in many parliaments there's such a committee, if I'm not wrong, and I think each parliament, as I said, has that kind of committee that deals with the youth and so on and so forth. But what does that committee actually do to encourage to develop? When you look at the texts that deal with the youth, maybe that where the shortfall is to be found. What do the MPs do? Because there is in my country that committee has is made up of 30 members of parliament, but there is a plenary, and there is there is communication between the different members of parliament, irrespective of their political tendencies, because I think everyone is in agreement as far as the youth are concerned, both those who are part of the government as well as those who are in the opposition. And I think that this is an issue or a group of people that brings together everybody else. And I think that this is an opportunity to actually perhaps to try and see here, as we sit here today, what are the ways and means that the parliament can use through a parliament itself, first of all, through its committees and its plenaries, through its legislative work, through its draft laws, because that is what a parliament does. As one colleague said, what can the parliament do for these people? And also in its involvement in a society, because an MP represents a larger constituency. There must be some link between the constituency and so on and so forth. And I think the member of parliament is responsible to those who elected him or her. And amongst those who elect an MP, they are young people, among others. And there are issues also that have to do with political courage. There's a colleague who talked about positions that have been entrusted to young people. In my country, there are young people who hold responsible positions. There are many MPs who are young. There are also many women also who occupy positions of responsibility. There are women who are ministers. There are women who are judges. There are provincial governors. There are women as well, even at the level of the army, the National Army, and who occupy grades who are generals, for example. So the question then that arises is, how are we going to create all of this synergy so that the parliament can play a role? And that role needs to be defined so as to accelerate the empowerment of this tranche of the population, which, if we do not support them, will become more and more vulnerable. When you talked about the responsibility of young people, when you have a French president who is 39 years old and other heads of government, the Obama, for example, was younger than 50 years, but today we don't want to entrust to a young person of 30 years old even lesser positions. I have finished, Chairperson. Thank you.
Very much. Yes, the next person. Yes, gentleman, and then the lady.
Chair, my hand has been going up. I don't know how many times.
Oh, see, I'm long-sighted.
Et merci, Monsieur le Président, de m'accorder la parole. Et moi, je viens du Burundi.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I come from Burundi, and I would like to share the experience that Burundi has in supporting the youth. From the structural point of view, we have a youth council within at the communal level, at the province, and then we have a national youth council. And that youth council it exists from the grassroots up to the very top. And at the level of parliament, we have a committee that deals with the issues of the youth, issues of gender. And for a certain time now, the Senate has been involved in sensitization activities aimed at the youth. And this is for early pregnancies and against gender-based violence, but also sensitization in order to encourage the education of virtually all of the young people. And therefore, the government has taken a decision, as some of my colleagues have said. So the government has taken a decision to offer free primary education for all. And the government has also done a lot of work in support of the youth. And it is in this way that during all holidays, the youth are kept busy with work that is supervised by members of the government, and when the young people are working, they are trained so that they can prepare for their future life. Here, too, as concerns the support offered to the youth, each commune in or every county in or every province has a football team, which means that the young people meet often to play sports, which is also a factor of supporting the youth. Chairperson, I thank you.
The next person seated to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. My name is Rabi Audu, and I represent the Clerks to the National Assembly of Nigeria. I just want to lend my voice to what colleagues have been saying thus far. In Nigeria, and particularly the National Assembly of Nigeria, we have what is called the National Youth Parliament. Though under the purview of the Ministry of Youth and Sports Development, but that parliament is being hosted by the National Assembly. And the Speaker of the Youth Parliament and his principal officers have offices within the Parliament. The National Assembly also, sponsor these officers to international youth, parliamentary programs. They also have their seminars and workshops within the Assembly complex. And of recent, Mr. Chairperson, if you recall, you were in Nigeria during the Speakers and Presiding Officers Conference, and we had this constitutional review. Now, because of the commitment of the National Assembly of Nigeria to the issue of youth inclusion in leadership and decision-making process, on 27th, the bill called "Not Too Young to Run" was passed, pegging the age for elective offices to the office of President at 35, state governors at 30, the Senate at 30, the House of Representatives and state houses of assembly at 25. So now the youths in Nigeria are warming up very seriously for the next election come 2019. Furthermore, on the part of government, we have the central bank, trying to stop the issue of youth unemployment by giving them loan to be self-employed. So we have so many youths now who are employers of laborers. They have their own businesses, and they in turn employ, their colleagues or friends to work for them in their own employment. We have philanthropists who are interested in youth empowerment program, like the Elumelu Foundation. They also support youths in Nigeria by giving them, loan, small scale to start a small scale businesses. And then the federal government and state governments, all in their own different ways, have, free primary and secondary education in some states, and for some is up to what we call the junior secondary level. We also have the Ministry of Youth and Sports Development that are taking the issue of youth restfulness very seriously. They are doing all that is, within their powers to ensure that, youths are kept busy, in different ways by involving them in, doing jobs that, the handicrafts, making them go into vocational education, not necessarily formal education, but, a knowledge that they could acquire to enable them be self-sufficient in life. So for Nigeria, we are trying to ensure that, the youths, are well placed, and also to doubt youth restfulness in Nigeria. This is my little contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You call it little contribution, but it has some budgetary implications. But for Nigeria, that's not a problem.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Very much, Chairperson. I do apologize for having to say something different from what has been said by others, because Africa remains a colonized continent. If we look at the educational systems at the level of the continent, and if we look a little bit at the structures of our societies, we shall agree that Africa is essentially composed of a rural society. And the young people that we're talking about now, 80% of them live in the rural areas, a world that has really not been affected by education or schools. And even if that has happened, it will be at a very low level. And when we talk about the youth, I think we are talking essentially about the young people in urban areas. How many young people in the rural areas are educated? How many in the rural areas go beyond the primary school level? Those young people. And if today we're talking about migrants, these migrants are all in all mostly from the rural areas because the city has actually virtually taken over what should have been being developed in the rural areas, and all the programs that have been put in place have been put in place in the big cities. The young people who have no training in the rural areas, that rural area is basically abandoned to itself. Agriculture, which is practiced, is a subsistence agriculture, which is barely sufficient to feed one's family. The African society, par excellence, is a society that is a society in which a family could have as many as 10 children, 10 children that they are not able to bring up, 10 children that the family cannot send to school. And very often the schools are very far from the villages. And so there are very few children who can actually go to those schools, and therefore many abandon school in the rural areas, and we see that that happens a lot in the rural areas. And then today, when we talk about programs, when we talk about the education of the youth, we forget that group of young people, those young people who live in the rural areas. If we look at our economies, the two most important areas of the economy is livestock and agriculture in most African countries. But have we really established schools to train farmers, to train livestock breeders? Have we really settled these people somewhere so that they can make their contribution to the economy? So that is the most important problem. The people who are trained in our schools, the book training that they get, those people do not come back to work in agriculture or in livestock. They are in the service industry, they are in ministries. And so the question is, how can we develop Africa if we do not take into account the realities of that other Africa? That is a question that I ask myself. And the development of the youth must be seen in a larger framework. The growth of the African economy must also be seen in a larger, a wider context. But if we want to, if we want to say that we want to invest in young people through education and health without actually dealing with the reality of the rural areas, to my mind, that is just going to be it will not achieve any results. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Gracias, señor presidente. Yo soy de Guinea Ecuatorial, secretario general del Senado. Señor presidente, quisiera...
Mr. Chairman, there is no Spanish. Spanish is not a working language. There's no Spanish, please. No Spanish interpretation available. There's no Spanish available. There's no Spanish. Okay, I'll speak French now. I'll try and speak French. Please release the channel. I am the Secretary General of the Senate. Portuguese.
Féliciter tous les intervenants.
I think, yes, all the speakers who spoke before me have already said that if we are talking about this theme, it is because this theme is extremely important. And it is also because we are considering this theme to be an important theme, and it's an important theme for Africa. And after all, youth are the future of Africa. Back home, when such a problem arises, generally, we see that there are lots of complaints. People say that the youth should behave differently, but at the same time, we should be in a position to analyze the source of the problems being faced by the youth. Why are we complaining about this youth? And what are we complaining about? Let me just give you the specific example of Equatorial Guinea. I'll just mention a few cases. At some point, the Ministry of Health had put in place very interesting programs. And they disseminated a lot of programs. But what was the result? In the field of education, we noticed that there were very few schools because children were not dying, or very few of them were dying, and the government didn't do what was needed to build more schools. So what else did we see? Recently, we saw that youth delinquency is on the rise. And when we analyze the status or the situation of delinquency, we try to see who are these people. These people are young people. most of these children are children born to single mothers. Single mothers in Africa are basically very young. Most of them are students who have no resources and who fell in the who were trapped by people who were much older than them, and they ended up having children. But unfortunately, they could not afford to bring them up. And these children had to grow up in the streets on their own. And of course, they learned a lot of bad things in these streets. So most of these children who are the youth today in the country are children born to unwed girls, single mothers who have not received any education, have not been brought up by a family. So the government has tried to take a few measures in order to address this problem. And what did the government try to do? So we tried to see what our strong points are. You must look at your strengths. You must look at your strengths and your weaknesses. In order to build schools, we must see where our strengths lie. We only have forests and the sea. But I can tell you that if you see what traditional carpenters are doing in the country, it's horrible. This country, which has so much timber, but we actually don't know how to use our timber. So the government tried to find a solution to solve the problems of these children who've ended up in the streets. And the only schools that we've tried to build so far are vocational training schools. We can also, of course, develop tourism. The vocational schools that we have established are schools where children are taught carpentry, masonry, and so on. They are taught different skills. And such schools are present in every provincial capital. So in every provincial capital, we have built a vocational training school in order to give an opportunity to children who have not had the luck of going to the classical school. And especially for those children who have ended up being delinquents in the streets. This has given them some hope. We've also built a tourism school because we decided to develop our tourism in the country, and of course fisheries, because we have a long coastline. So even when God built things on this earth, he started small. So even our countries should take that example and start small. We shouldn't, think very big. We should start small and build on it. We should start at the district level and see how the districts have addressed these problems so that other people at a higher level can learn from these examples. Our parliament, what can our parliament do? Not much, actually. The Parliament of Equatorial Guinea cannot do much. We as parliamentarians or people from the administration of the parliament can simply encourage their children to go to school, to have a skill, so that it will be beneficial to them in their own future. But the government is responsible for everything in the country. It is the government which puts together the development plans for the country. ever since I was appointed the clerk of the Senate, I have not seen a parliamentary initiative being taken in the House of Representatives or even in the Senate, which have been implemented. Most of these decisions are taken by the executive branch, but very often the executive forgets that the parliamentarians are very close to the populations. They know exactly what the populations want. They know the complaints and the demands of the population. We can simply give advice to the executive branch and we can just tell them that they are not on the right path. They're not on the right track. So we can just advise them to do the right thing for our populations. I see that we have a lot to say, Mr. Chairman, and I don't want to take more of your time. And I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think that we have exhausted.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairperson. I'm here.
Yes.
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then you will be the last speaker for now.
Thank you, Chair. I realized that you really wanted me to be the last speaker, and I thank you for that. I am Eric Pindela from the Parliament of the Republic of South Africa. And I take this opportunity to welcome you all to the Republic of South Africa. I also take this opportunity, Chair, to wish all the women a happy Women's Day. 61 years ago today, the women of South Africa rejected the application of pass laws to them. And that is why today we have Women's Day in South Africa. The role of the youth in the liberation of this country cannot be overstated. 41 years ago, on June 16, the youth of this country rejected Afrikaans as a medium of instruction. And by so doing, they set in motion the events that ultimately led to the liberation of this country. Many of them were maimed, many of them were detained, many of them went into exile. And that is why the South Africa then declared June 16 a Youth Day as a holiday, and it's nationally observed as such. That shows the importance of the youth in this country, or the role that the youth played in the liberation of this country. South Africa has a national development plan. It has a national youth policy. I think earlier this morning we spoke about the AU programs, and reference was made to the youth policy. And South Africa, as I have indicated, has such a policy. South Africa also has a National Youth Development Agency, which focuses on matters relating to the youth. We also have, as I have indicated, Youth Day, and the South African Parliament and the legislative sector in general in South Africa also has what we refer to as National Youth Parliament, which is normally held on the 16th of June. And as I have indicated, that shows the centrality of the role of the youth in the liberation of this country. I think a reference has been made to the youth bulge. South Africa also recognizes that the majority of the people who, in most instances, are exposed to the evils of drug abuse, the evils of alcohol abuse and so on, poverty, unemployment is the youth. And when South Africa developed its development plan, it focused on what it referred to as the youth lens. In other words, it looked at the problems and challenges through the lens of the youth. Chair, we as the clerks or secretaries general of parliaments, we can continue to talk about what the executive is doing insofar as youth matters are concerned. But I think we should turn that question to parliaments and ask ourselves a question. What are parliaments doing to ensure that matters relating to youth are attended to? A reference was also made earlier today to Agenda 2063. I have hardly heard any reference to Sustainable Development Goals. I think we should also refer to Sustainable Development Goals. And unless the development plans of the countries that do have these plans integrate Agenda 2063, for instance, and Sustainable Development Goals into their programs, matters relating to youth may not necessarily be attended to. As parliaments, the role that parliaments can play insofar as ensuring that matters relating to the youth are attended to would be to make sure that they oversee the implementation of these programs. They make laws to ensure that these programs are implemented, and to make sure that they influence or they involve the youth in parliamentary processes. Parliaments must also ensure that they involve the youth insofar as public education programs are concerned, ensuring that the youth know and understand the role that parliaments play. And really that should be the focus of parliaments. The executive will continue to make policies, the executive will continue to introduce laws in parliaments, the executive will continue to introduce budgets in parliaments. But as long as parliaments do not make sure that these matters also include reference to youth development, these matters will not be attended to. We should also look at youth with disabilities. I think we have to make sure that our parliaments are youth friendly, that youth with disabilities also feel welcomed at our parliaments. Youth who are using wheelchairs, for instance, should have ramps in parliaments so that they can access parliaments. Parliaments must also make sure that youth that are, for instance, blind, can also access parliaments. We should develop, for instance, materials which are in Braille to make sure that even the people who cannot see can also read the material developed by parliaments. Unless we do that, the youth will lose confidence in parliaments. We should ensure that we strengthen parliaments for effective oversight. Unless we do that, then the youth will lose confidence in parliament. I think in most instances we say that the youth are the leaders of tomorrow. I think earlier on when the speaker who spoke on AU programs relating to the youth said that the youth is impatient. The youth is saying that they can no longer be referred to as the leaders of tomorrow. They are saying that they are ready to lead today, and therefore must be referred to as leaders. So we have to develop the youth in such a way that we develop the leaders of today, we develop the leaders of tomorrow. But the general point that I want to make, Chair, and that I want us to concentrate on, and even in the discussions that will come insofar as this matter is concerned, is really to focus on the role of parliaments insofar as ensuring that there's effective oversight on matters relating to the youth, to ensure that policies relating to the youth are implemented, that the budgets are youth-friendly, that wherever it is necessary to make laws relating to matters relating to the youth, parliaments must be prepared to initiate laws relating to those matters and not only wait for the executive to initiate laws insofar as those matters are concerned. And on matters relating to the youth that are serving before parliaments, parliaments must make sure, they must make an effort to ensure that the youth is involved in the parliamentary processes. And as I have indicated in conclusion, public education programs must ensure that they take into consideration matters relating to the youth so that we catch them young. As they grow, they understand the role of parliament and they understand that parliament is a platform that can be used to ensure that matters relating to the youth are attended to. And I thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We would have missed that all-important contribution if you had remained silent. I want to thank all of us for the contributions that we have made in various. One of the things which I also want to share with you in addressing the issue of youth has to do with the issue of teenage pregnancy. The Parliament of Sierra Leone attempted to address that issue by passing a bill into law which will address the issue of safe abortion. Now, what happened? The interreligious bodies, both the Muslims and the Christians, in large numbers, marched to State House to the president that he should not sign that bill into law. Even though those that are affected really wanted the bill to pass into law. But the interreligious bodies intervened and they said this is immoral. They cited a lot of Quranic and biblical interpretation of the thing. Even the medical board came in and tried to give defense on the usefulness of this bill, the safe abortion bill. So we ended up withdrawing that bill. And up till now, the bill is in limbo. So in our effort to try to save teenage pregnancy, we ended it in deadlock. So we want to thank you again and we want to give an opportunity to the consultants to give a summary, starting with our youth lady here.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just take 5 minutes. First of all, I would like to commend all the speakers and all the states that have taken the floor. And I see that all the states present here are contributing to the development of youth in their respective states. I'd like to come back to what the representative of Côte d'Ivoire said. Well, as he said, when you are young, it's just a transitional phase. It's not a status. In any case, we are all getting old as time goes by. I appreciated your comment on the budget, in particular, on the state budget. And the South African representative and others have also asked the question about the role of the parliament. The parliament's role in terms of investment in the youth and their empowerment in general. So I really don't understand why in our different parliaments we we endorse programs of governments which have nothing to do for the youth, and they have no impact on the youth. So in Algeria, mentioned earlier, that the issue of youth is multi-sectoral. It's a cross-cutting issue. It is not just one ministry in a state that is responsible for youth issues. Youth development should be a multi-sectoral commitment of our governments. So how is it that our parliaments who are supposed to review the government programs allow the programs to pass without any importance granted to youth issues? We have the budget, which is also adopted in the parliament, and that is the government's budget. How is it that we allow the budget to go through when there is nothing earmarked for the development of youth issues in our respective countries? And that is the role of the parliament we are discussing. This is the recommendation that we should submit, because the AU Heads of State Summit in January will also be discussing youth issues. That's where they're going to adopt the funds, and they're going to talk about the operationalization of the funds for the development of the African youth. I'm not speaking on behalf of the parliaments, but I'm just trying to insist on the role to be played by our different parliaments to see how we can push the youth agenda ahead. We must make sure that something is earmarked for youth issues in our budget. Otherwise, it will be difficult to develop programs for the youth, because the ministers responsible for youth always complain about lack of funds for youth projects. Unfortunately, most budgets do not have resources allocated for youth issues. Then what's the purpose of having a ministry for youth affairs? They might as well scrap the ministry if there is no budget which is allocated to the Ministry of Youth Affairs. So the government should make available resources to all ministries, especially to the Ministry of Youth, so that youth issues can be implemented and addressed. In my own country, the Republic of Congo, I do intervene on the media and elsewhere to make sure that the African youth issues are taken on board. When we talk about the youth, we should focus our attention on three things, particularly economic participation, political participation, why not, and also in the field of education, try and see how we can invest in the youth. Mozambique spoke about funds, youth funds that are available in their state, and it is like the fund that we have just adopted in the African Union. So I'd like to commend you, and I encourage you to improve this. It is through entrepreneurship that we can hope to reduce youth unemployment in our states. Entrepreneurship is important to create jobs for the youth. So I encourage all the states not to just have a fund which is in the African Union, but they should have a fund at the regional level, at the national level, in order to give opportunities to the youth to access resources and thus develop their own initiatives. Uganda spoke about young representatives who are present in the parliament. This has to be further encouraged. We're also encouraging other countries present here to have youth representatives in their parliaments, particularly national youth councils, which should be put in place to make sure that youth are represented in the parliament. I also heard that there are certain parliaments that have youth committees, and that's a very good thing, because this allows parliaments to address certain youth issues that might come up. For example, laws that are passed in our parliament, there should be a youth committee to monitor the implementation of these laws, to make sure that the youth are not forgotten in all the laws that are passed by our parliaments. So the youth committee in our parliaments is an important element to make sure that they can monitor their issues and also define the parliament's role for the development of the youth.
Zambia has spoken about the Youth National Council and cooperatives that address issues relating to the youth in entrepreneurship. I know there are about 20 or so young people who then set up a cooperative, and through that they're able to develop their skills and be in a position to use them to get access to finance and to create employment for fellow youngsters. So it's not money that is given to an individual per se, but it is because you have the youth that work alongside the state and create a mechanism that opens up opportunities and allows them to have access to funding for them to be able then to participate in economic activity, because this is going to help a lot of youngsters in their respective countries. And therefore we encourage this activity and work being carried out by Zambia. We encourage other countries to emulate Zambia and ensure that there is follow-up. Liberia, I know what you're doing for the youth in your country with all these organizations that you've put together that work with the Senate and other parliamentary institutions. I think you have a law that actually gives the youth access to policies, to have the sphere in which they can then operate alongside various other organs of policy. So it is important, therefore, that we revisit all these laws and thus allow the youth to take part in activities that are designed to further governance and which give opportunities to the youth and determine at what age we can consider somebody as part and parcel of that group of people that we call the youth. So which goes from 15 to 35 years according to the African Youth Charter. The Congo Republic, I think hats off, because you're part of the countries that participated in launching this program. And I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate you, because I think you've just organized elections in your country, and we know a lot of people who are part of the youth movement who are now in parliament, and I would like to see other countries follow in the footsteps of the Congo and involve the youth in their political activities. There is also something that I wanted to refer to. I think that was not Cote d'Ivoire, actually, it's still Congo, because we cannot decide on behalf of the youth without their participation. It is important. You can't decide on behalf of someone who's not been involved from word go. So it's important that they're part and parcel of the decision-making process in their favor, because if they're taken outside that sphere, then those decisions are really null and void. So it is important that we make sure that they are properly organized so that they work as a movement of the youth. Then the Algerian constitution, I've followed very keenly the preparation and introduction of the new constitution in Algeria, because it does recognize the importance of the youth and gives them the requisite powers. Last year, I went to Algeria at least 4 times, but this year I didn't, because I've been there several times. So I skipped that, but I've been following development of issues from my country, and I've also read quite a number of articles that are targeting the youth and opens up opportunities for the youth, for them to be able to participate in the development of their countries, both economically and politically. And hats off to Algeria, which has made, I think, significant advances in this particular area. And I've seen a number of young people actually get to parliament after the elections in Algeria. So it is important, therefore. And I've also been following developments in Burundi. I've been to Burundi a couple of times. I work with the president and the government of Burundi for further development of programs designed to help the youth in that country, and also in discussions that are designed to bring back peace to that country. And we've been working with those who are in the opposition as well as those who belong to the government in power. So we've been also working to try and help free some of the young people who have been victims of manipulations of the conflict that have been bedeviling that country. So I would like to thank the government of Burundi, because today Burundi is in the process of actually creating a national bank that is designed to help the youth. And I think this is something that we ought to encourage, and also encourage other countries to think along the same lines and see how best we can promote the agenda of the youth. And I'm not talking on behalf of my government, of course, but what we've been trying to do is that we continue to help young people in various countries to continue to work peacefully towards the introduction of a fund, for example, designed to promote job creation for the youth. And I know that there is a provincial fund that has been proposed for Haya Katanga and the province of Lualaba. So those funds have already got a lot of contributions, and I'm sure this is going to help the youth to come up with their own cooperatives and slowly allow them to move to becoming entrepreneurs in their own countries. And today in High Katanga, there are young people who have opened up cooperatives which are helping them participate in mining activities. So it is important that we make sure that as young people, we are able to contribute to the development of our countries and come up with a middle class. And I know that there's a law that has been promulgated not long ago, and that law is encouraging the creation of wealth by Congolese for Congolese. And I think we're also seeing more and more politicians help create a middle class instead of just getting small jobs here and there, but have a development of our own middle class that is going to contribute to creating wealth in the country. And also we hope that in other countries this is going to serve as a model, and we can come up with cooperative and also do consultancy work. So all these consultancy works that are being given to foreigners could also see nationals participate, and they can benefit directly from that law and be able to have markets, to have participation in public procurement and so on. Because last week I had a discussion with the Prime Minister, Bruno Tshibala, where we were able to launch a very important project where the civil services is involved, because we could use with people who have been retired. Well, they're not really old, but they've been working in the civil service, and to my mind, there are people who are not probably not dynamic enough any longer. So I think the civil service was a bit falling behind, and we thought that there are a lot of young people across the country, and I'm talking about one of the provinces, the Equator, where we were also working towards recruiting young people in the civil service. And we hope that between now and the next 6 months, we'll have at least 20,000 young people who would be recruited in the civil service to replace those who have gone either into retirement or those who are no longer able to contribute positively to the development of the country. So this is what we had in mind in terms of contribution to the development of the country by the youth, and in so doing help the country develop. And I want to congratulate Nigeria, because Nigeria has got passed a bill, I think a bill that was initiated by young Nigerians, and this has become, I think, something that has got repercussions across the globe. So I want to congratulate Nigeria for that, and I hope that with this bill, Not Too Young to Run, I think it allows young Nigerians to take part in good governance. And I want Nigerians to also come and join us in the African Consortium of the Youth. And I think it's important that we impress upon the Nigerian government to give us a branch in that country. We are working with Dangote and Tommy Lumelo to see how best we can invest in the youth. And also South Africa, which I think is one of the model countries which is working through the office of the President, Mr. Jacob Zuma, together with, I think, work that is being carried out to try and tackle the issue of drug. And Fees Must Fall is another activity where we are working with the youth in South Africa to see how best they can help these youngsters to continue with their education. I think these are some of the dossiers that we want to ensure that they keep making progress. And then we have also the School of Administration, for example. These are schools that are usually reserved for the elite. But we go back to what the President said, that a minister who was in charge of youth affairs has now become an activist, and after that he became an ambassador and came back with additional experience and is able to see things from a different angle. So when we need to make sure that training continues to be given to young people so that they're able to better work. And when we are recruiting in the civil service, so we make sure, and this we have insisted, that it is important that we recruit people who are in the age group spanning from 15 to about 35, not recruiting people who are already 60 and 85, who has been there already for quite a long time and who've been taking that place from the youth. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you.
Président, s'il vous plaît.
Provoking summary. It is almost like a new presentation.
Non, Monsieur le Président. Je peux aller?
Thank you very much.
Monsieur le Président, c'est...
Mr. Chairman, my name is Professor Saman of the Democratic Republic of Congo, who's asking for the floor. I'm asking the floor, Mr. Chairman, because I want to inform you of a small matter. We want to start by saying thank you to the audience for having participated so actively in managing this issue relating to the youth. But allow me to share one experience, because I want to congratulate the speaker, the chairperson of the Youth Caucus, who is from Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I want to salute whatever she's doing, and I wanted to share that joy with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and maybe we would like to invite you to visit all these countries here present to share your experience in dealing with the issue about youths. May we also now have the other consultant.
Thank you, Chair. And to balance, I'll give you points in French. So those who are listening in English change. Je voulais juste...
Mr. Chairman, let me address 3 items. The first of them, Mr. Chairman, with your kind permission, is that I want to come back to what I said earlier. it is important that we continue to share views on the importance of the youth, whether they be positive or negative, because there are a lot of young people who are doing great things, including those who are here and those who were young sometime in the past. So it is important that we portray an image that is genuine, truthful, and positive of the youth. Because as adults, when we make mistakes, we are not fingered as a problem class. So that should be the case for the youth as well. That is the first item. Because I think that we know that the youth are the majority in most of the African countries. Truly, I think we can work hand in hand with the youth to try and harness the development dividends, and by also using the population as one of the means of production, and thus boosting economic development and social development. So that is the first item that I wanted to share with you. Secondly, I want to congratulate countries. I think a lot of countries have come up with programs, but what we are requesting is not really that we look down on what countries are doing, but that we work with Parliament, because Parliament has got an oversight role, so that they're able then to assess what progress has been made and try to build on that. Because we have the Ministry of Youth Affairs, which is usually combined with sports, or as you know, that in our government, you know what that represents in terms of access to budget, how are the youth perceived. Because when you say youth and leisure, we gang them together, some people think that it's just leisure, and in some countries it's youth and growth. So there's no Ministry of Youth and Vision. And so in addition to that, I think let me address the issue of intergenerational solidarity, because the experience that you mentioned earlier, I think, is extremely good. But it's not really a matter of having conflicting views as youth and adults, because our generation and the generation that is coming behind us, because those who are going to look after us when we've retired are those who are coming after us. It's not what we have got as pension schemes and so on, because that money is already being used now. So for retirement, we can only live in the right conditions if this generation that is coming after us is able to produce more. Otherwise, I think we'll have the same crisis. So it's important that we look after the youth. Furthermore, the role of Parliament. I'm not a member of Parliament, of course, as you probably know, but I'm very, very pleased with what I heard from the Member of Parliament from Cote d'Ivoire, Algeria, and so on. I think this is a role that we deem to be extremely important. But someone spoke about the disparity between rural areas and urban areas. And that too is important. But do we ever have the opportunity to go get data that exists? If it doesn't exist, we can always collect it to in actual fact, I'm trying to really find out what I have in mind, because I think, let me fall back on a recent experience that I had in Chad on the demographic dividend and beliefs and religion. Because when we discuss, usually you have a school of thought that says it's because of customs And in some cases, people get married too early. They say this is part of our custom. But when you ask the person involved, are you, as you sit here, agree that your daughter be married at 9? Are you prepared to send your child to just go and learn tailoring and then go and work in a poor community? So I'll give you 2 examples. The first one on health, where you have a young kid getting married at 9, and on health as well. I know that a lot of people who are representatives of given communities do not really defend those communities. In the case of Chad, there was a young girl who was the victim of fistula. Who was really involved in issues relating to tradition, and who said that early marriages is part and parcel of the development of young people. But when one of the people became a victim of fistula and saw for the first time with his own eyes what that represents, that person changed. So what is important is that when you are a representative of a community, you have to represent the given, the said community. And we will all, at a given time, be young. But one of the reason behind cybercrime crime is that these young people are just looking for hope. They have got ambitions, because whatever you are proposing, if it does not meet their expectations, then they do something else, because every young person yearns for freedom. And whether it be a girl or a boy, they want to be able to look after their families, be in a position to send their children to school. I know that we have a number of programs that do not, even education does not really open doors to decent income. So if you suggest that they go to school for those courses, they won't take them up. I know that these programs are important, but at the same time, it is important that we underline the fact that we need to show them living experiences of other young people who have gone through a given profession and who have been able to succeed. And that, I think, will serve as a catalyst to try and drag along other people working in that community. I think this is a positive example that we could probably share with the youth. So very quickly, let me end my statement, because I know that we are in South Africa. You know what happened in 1976. I think that mass movement by the youth was seen at the time as something negative. That's why that was followed by very strong reaction by the police, even massacres, if you could call it that way. So, and this is what opened the door to education. But at the time, it was perceived as being negative. Once again, I think as MPs, I know that when you're an MP, sometimes your stay in your seat does not last long. But again, I think it is important that you be able to meet the expectation of a given community, so that we bring some of the things in the discussion, the discourse that is being experienced today. Because demographic dividend in Africa, when we discuss it across Africa, I think it's important that we make sure that we integrate it in the process, so that we look back at the time when we started, because from 2012 to now, what have we achieved, so that we can then use that as a stepping stone. Now let me take you back to a technical level. Job creation, education, these are extremely important things. I'm from Côte d'Ivoire, so I'll give you just one example of something that happened in Côte d'Ivoire, where the Ministry of Education, working with partners, decided to strengthen programs designed to encourage young people to get education. But what happened is we looked at cases of pregnancies in school environment. How many young girls end up pregnant either at primary school level or secondary school level? So that we design certain programs, not only corrective, but also to improve the situation so that we make sure that there's zero tolerance for pregnancies in school. I think parliamentarians can do something like that so that we can then carry out an audit and see whether we succeeded or we failed. And also see where the problems lie with the youth, because maybe we don't have solutions, but at least we can review the situation and see what happened and what we can do. Let me stop here, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
For that brief summary, we will now ask the other lady if she has anything to say, or you can now come in. Yeah.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Moi, je vais être très bref.
Very much, Chairperson. I'm going to be very, very brief, and I'm going to insist on the legal issues, the legislative issues, to say this is my first point, and I think it will be in the form of a question that I'll be asking myself rather than an answer to questions asked. In the light of the discussions that have taken place this afternoon, I ask myself the question as to whether we are not heading in the same direction in our thinking as we have always done as far as the youth are concerned. And I remember that when we were talking, we were having discussions about gender, parliaments and legislators finally were approached to see whether or not our laws took into account the gender aspect, and especially the issue of the emancipation of women. And side by side with the youth, I ask myself whether this is not the time, is not the opportune time when we should look at our laws and see which of those laws contain obstacles to the emancipation of young people. And I think that questions such as limits that are linked to a person's age and many other requirements which when addressed to the youth, exclusive and discriminatory. Maybe some do so in an acceptable way, but perhaps if we look at the issue more closely, we may begin to actually see which laws need to be updated so that they can take into account the issue of the empowerment of the youth. And then the second point, which is linked to the key role that parliaments play. And there is the requirement when we refer to the rights of vulnerable people, for example, indigenous peoples, there is a principle of prior consultation. And I wonder whether that could not be applicable to the youth. And I think the answer could be yes. For those laws that concern young people, the requirement to have prior consultations with them, that condition could perhaps be applicable. And of course, some of our parliaments do have in their legislative procedures the requirement of consulting the people, the citizens, and the rigor and the effectiveness with which that procedure is implemented could, in fact, we could question whether or not actually it is implemented rigorously. And especially as concerns the issue of the young people, I think that since today there are structures of the youth, there are structures for young people, it is therefore necessary that laws and that all parliamentary work that has to do with the young people should necessarily take into account the point of view of the young people. And finally, I would also like to say that most of our countries, in their development programs, are based on plans which are defined in advance. And I think that if parliamentarians were sensitized, they could perhaps ensure that when next they discuss their strategic plans, they could insist that aspects that have to do with the young people and the empowerment of the young people should be taken into account, because my opinion is that even if the laws are in place and even if some mechanisms are in place, if the vision for the development of our countries, which is is decided many years in advance, does not take into account the issue of youth, it would make things very complicated. And finally, I would like to say that the laws, even the good ones, could finally be weakened if their implementation is not ensured. And I think, therefore, that the laws that we could put in place and those that already exist should go side by side with the deliberate will on the part of our parliament to ensure that they are implemented. And in order to do that, I could give the example of the issue of retirement. Those who have spoken before me have said, for example, that in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, there are a number of civil servants who were forced to go into retirement, and many of these people went into retirement long after they should have gone into retirement. And I think that in many public institutions, the fact that civil servants have that have had their retirement delayed, that has had an impact on the youth who are waiting to be able to join the civil service. And I think that the parliament has a role to play, not only to ensure that the executive respects the legal requirements, and especially concerning what I have just said, especially as far as the retirement age is concerned. And I think also that the role of the parliament can be important, because in order to send people on retirement, you need a budget. And for example, in the example given by the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the problem was that of lack of funds, a lack of the necessary resources to pay the people who were supposed to go on retirement. So we find ourselves in a vicious circle. But the delay came about because the money was not, the money to pay these people was not available. And I think it has happened today because the money was finally made available. And I think that the role of Parliament in the budgetary process, I think, is well known. And I think that Parliament has a very important role to play. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I think we have almost come to the end of this presentation and the summaries, and I want to thank all of us for the patience that we have demonstrated so far in discussing this all-important topic about our youths, our children, although they don't want to be addressed as the leaders of tomorrow. But I mean, every step would have to start with the first step. And it is within that context that we address them as the leaders of tomorrow, because they would have to go through the different stages to prepare them. So once again, I thank you very much for the support which you have given me to steer these deliberations. And on that note, unless there are some housekeeping announcements.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Just
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Just to point out that in our program, we're supposed to have to take a break. To help us, we need to take a break so that we can finalize the recommendations that the parliamentarians will adopt. I don't know whether, considering that it is late, I don't know whether we really should take a break, but we do have a document which was sent to me by my colleagues. The colleagues who are helping us to take notes, but unfortunately, since we had a very tight program, the document is only available in English. So we have either the possibility of taking a break, even of 5 minutes, so that we can send the document to our colleagues so that they can project it, the IT colleagues, so they can project it on the screen. That is the first possibility. Then we'll come back after 5 minutes to adopt it. And if there are amendments, we shall take note of them. And the second possibility is perhaps, since it is late, we could send the document for translation in the working languages of our meeting, and then we could ask you whether it might be possible for us to meet perhaps tomorrow at a certain moment in time to adopt it. But that would mean that when tomorrow we come to the conference of speakers, we shall distribute the document to yourselves, and around break time we can meet briefly to adopt it.
Well, I threw that to the floor to see what the possibility would look like in the light of the fact that the speakers will be meeting tomorrow, and it's almost going to 6 p.m. now. And we do not know whether the 5 minutes will be sufficient for the kind of work which the Secretariat would like to do. Are there? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I think the last proposal is the one that I would request that it be adopted, that the document is distributed to us, and then we meet tomorrow. It be translated into other languages, then we meet tomorrow to finalize it. Thank you.
Do we hold the same view, all of us, so that we can wait tomorrow, and so that we can fix the time? What time do you think that the document will be available tomorrow?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the English version is ready, so we could send it for translation tomorrow morning. First thing, it should be the other version should be ready.
Well, you have had it, so that we go back and freshen up, and tomorrow morning the French version will be available. Yeah.
Oui, bienvenue, Evoko. D'abord.
First of all, what time will the conference of speakers begin? And secondly, we at the level of our association, the Association of Secretary Generals of African Parliaments, at the level of our association, it is extremely important that we agree on a methodology of working. We are high-level officers, and there is a way in which we work in our different parliaments, because this methodology means that we're going to leave here without really having any knowledge, having taken a serious note of what we have done, because we have to report back to our respective parliaments. So we shall leave Midrand. We shall just we should go with at least a document. That's what I would wish to see happen. So I would like to suggest that at the level of the association, we agree on how we can improve our working methods, because it doesn't add any credibility to our young association that is just throwing down its roots.
Yes, as the English version is already available, and maybe if we could just spend a few minutes to go through it, but that will also leave the problem of the French version. But if we can make do with that, maybe. Voilà. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Very much, Chairperson. We are the ones in charge of procedures in our respective parliaments, and we are used to working the way that parliaments work. You understand, and after more years, more 20, 25 years of working in parliaments, the way in which you're suggesting we work is not acceptable. The procedure that we have the English version, and then you say, oh, we can just go ahead in 5 minutes. I think that is not serious enough. I think it is good to go along with the first proposal that was made. In other words, tomorrow, the different language versions should be availed. And while the meeting of speakers is taking place, we could make comments. And when the meeting of speakers is finished, we come and we adopt it simply. But in that case, I would say, otherwise it is not serious. And when we go to back to our our parliament, we can understand how a young association can just fizzle out. So I'm thinking that we need to be a little bit more careful. Yeah.
You see, we are caught up with time constraints. The fact that the speakers will be meeting tomorrow, and what he was trying to suggest to put across is that this document also needs to go through the speakers as part of the documents that they will be discussing. So that was why he made that suggestion. But if that suggestion is not okay, and we want to stay back and go through the document and finish it, because this morning also we had constraints, transport constraints. We had what the president was trying to say. The meeting should have started earlier than it started this morning, and we might not know what the meeting would look like tomorrow. But it is for us to decide what we think is best for us and to make the necessary adjustment. Any additional suggestions?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I think yeah, there seems to be a push for the document to be adopted tomorrow. And indeed, in the speaker's program, the document will be considered the next day, not tomorrow. So it means that if we can have this English version distributed to participants who are English-speaking speakers, then tomorrow morning we will share the other languages, and if possible, we can agree on a time, maybe around lunchtime or after lunchtime, to have comments back. But it means that for those who speak English, we can get comments in the morning tomorrow when they come. We can get and amend the document accordingly. And then for the other languages, we can amend as we receive the observations and comments, so that by the time we meet after lunch, we can just spend maybe 30 minutes or less than that to adopt the document.
Well, colleagues, that is also the other suggestion, that we receive the documents tomorrow for presentation next tomorrow, the second day of the speakers' meeting. So what do you think about it? So that we'll have enough time to look at it, to make corrections, make input, especially in terms of the translated versions. Are there any different views? Do we assume that we agree to do the presentation the second day of the speakers' meeting? If that is the consensus, may I therefore put the question? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you very much, colleagues. And tomorrow we'll see. Wish you all the best so that you can have these documents ready. Yes, tomorrow, because everybody looks tired. Thank you very much for the work. It has not been easy.